Hello and welcome to Decision NYC with Ben Max. I'm Ben Max, your host and the executive editor of Gotham Gazette. The 2021 New York City election season is underway and it's poised to be the most significant municipal election in decades. All of city government is on the ballot, and because so few incumbents are eligible to run for their current seats due to term limits, New Yorkers are electing many new office holders and the next roster of leadership for our city. There will be a new mayor of New York City elected here in 2021, as well as a new city controller, new borough presidents, and many new city council members. And that's not all that's on the ballot. There are several incumbents who are eligible and seeking re-election, and there's a very crowded and competitive race for Manhattan District Attorney, and more. Party primaries are set for June, and the general election in the fall will culminate on November 2nd. This is the first full set of municipal elections that will feature both early voting as well as the new ranked choice voting system that applies only to party primaries and special elections. And we'll have a special show just on that. This city election cycle would be of enormous importance under even usual circumstances, but it's unfolding at a time of great crisis in our city, raising the stakes for the decisions that you, the voter, will make. The new wave of city leadership will, quite clearly, make or break the city's recovery from the devastation of COVID-19 and its impact on health, families, jobs, education, and more. So we're pleased to bring you this new series of interviews with the candidates running for mayor of New York City, as well as candidates for other offices. These one-on-one conversations will help you get to know the candidates better, learn about their backgrounds and platforms, where they stand on key issues, and what their vision is for the future of this city. We hope this and other interviews will help you sort through your many choices and make an informed decision when it's time to vote. So today's conversation, joining me by Zoom, is Bill Pepitone, who's running in the Republican and Conservative Party primaries for mayor of New York City. Bill, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. So, broad overview of who you are, your background before this race, what your life has been all about.
Sure. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, native New Yorker. I was a New York City police officer for 20 years. I worked in an elite mobile response unit for 14 years, and I was a tactics instructor and training coordinator in the New York City Police Academy for 5 years. I have over 30 years of experience total with law enforcement, public safety, private security, and operational management. I currently live on Staten Island, work on Staten Island. I have 3 beautiful daughters who motivate me to do stuff like this. And I love New York. It's my home, and that's why I'm fighting for it.
Okay, so what brings you to the race for New York City mayor? What was the decision point that led you to jump in this race and vie for these nominations?
What motivated me and what really was the turning point for me was what happened to our city in June when we were watching the riots in New York City. We were watching some of the most expensive commercial real estate in the world get looted and burned and wind up boarded up with private security and guard dogs in front of it. Police officers attacked, civilians attacked with no response, just total lack of civility. And as I sat there in my living room, I watched it unfold. It angered me. It bothered me. And I figured I had 2 things I could do. I could go on social media and rant and rave, but that doesn't accomplish anything. So I decided to step up. I figured with my skill set, my love of the city, my knowledge of law enforcement, my knowledge of operational management, that I would make a good candidate for New York City. I would be the right person at the right time, and I can help fix what's wrong.
I want to come back to the protests, the looting issues around policing in a minute that you just got at, but just talk a little bit more about what that skill set you mentioned is. What are the sort of characteristics, the skills that you think you possess at this point that would be of value to the city as in some respects the chief executive officer of the massive city government that we have in New York?
I think there's 3 things missing from City Hall right now that fit into my skill set. 1 is leadership. 2 is communication. And 3 is really the ability to, well, I guess it falls under leadership, lead by example. I don't think we have any of that in City Hall. I think that was painfully obvious during those months. I'm a good leader. I'm a strong leader. I've led many people, many fellow officers. I've instructed 21-year-old recruits and turned them into New York City police officers within 6 months, along with my other instructors. I've been involved in many nonprofit organizations, led many opportunities, a lot of projects that were helping people less fortunate. And my communication, I think it is so important for the mayor of the city of New York to be able to communicate to all races, all religions, all creeds, everyone. You have to be able to get your message out to everyone. And I can do that. I've done that. I've spoken to people. As a police officer, I've worked in every neighborhood, in every community. So I know what they're up against. I know what their obstacles are, and I can help them and I can communicate what our message is.
Talk a little bit about your perspective on the evolution of the NYPD over the last couple of decades. How do you see how it's changed? How has it changed, in your opinion, for the better? How has it changed for the worse?
Well, I think the New York City Police Department has taken a major step back over the last 7 or 8 years. I also believe that there was a need for a change. I believe the policies that worked under Mayor Giuliani, under Commissioner Bratton, under Commissioner Carrick, were the right policies at the right time. They effected change that was necessary coming out of the Dinkins administration. It drove down crime. It made New York City the safest big city in the world. And economically, we had an economic boom because of public safety. And you will get that when you have a safe city. But I think it went off the rails a little bit after the Giuliani administration. I believe a lot of the policies became number driven, and that led to a lot of unnecessary confrontations between New York City police officers and members of the minority community. I do have a plan how to fix that. But we've gone too far the other way right now. Now it's become the police aren't proactive, they're reactive. They're nothing more than report takers right now, showing up on the scene after someone's been, God forbid, shot or injured or robbed, basically taking a report. And New York City can't survive with a reactive police department. They need a proactive, aggressive, and fair police department.
Do you think that was true before the pandemic? Because generally speaking, crime, violent crime especially, was continuing to drop in the early De Blasio years. Do you think there were issues with leadership of the police department before about a year ago? And
I believe there was, and I believe it was the lack of leadership from City Hall. I think we saw that a couple of years ago, several years ago, when we had a demonstration march through New York City with protesters chanting, "What do we want? Dead cops." And we didn't get a response from City Hall, not the response that was necessary. And a short time after, we had 2 police officers assassinated as they sat in their police vehicle. I think that set the tone. And I think we've been on a bit of a downward spiral since then. The incident that happened in Minneapolis certainly was a trigger, and we didn't respond the right way. New York City didn't respond the right way. Obviously, no one agreed with what happened in Minneapolis, but to completely handcuff the police here was the wrong move.
What do you see as what those handcuffs are? There's folks, someone like Eric Adams, obviously not the same political party that you're running in, but former, decades long member of the NYPD, who he thinks, the NYPD sort of within the ranks has pulled back quite a bit, that it's not necessarily coming from City Hall, but it's officers that don't feel respected. It's people that are frustrated by some legislation that's being passed, but that, there's too many cops, commanders not really just sort of doing their job. Do you think there's any validity to that, or you think it's about leadership from City Hall and elsewhere that's ordered more of a pullback? Because the mayor's not saying he's ordered a pullback, right?
No, of course not. I don't think they've ordered a pullback at all, but their actions have sent a clear message. The push for the diaphragm law basically made it impossible for a police officer to effect the arrest of a non-compliant subject. There's absolutely no way, when someone's struggling with you and doesn't want to be arrested, which happens quite often, for you to use any kind of force to effect that arrest. And when we had police officers who were suspended immediately and who the mayor lashed out on publicly, it sent a very, very loud message that even if you're doing your job in 100% good faith, there's a chance you will lose your job. There's a chance you will be disciplined. There's a chance you'll be indicted. And that scares police officers. Of course, how could it not? And that sent a very, very loud signal that it should be hands off. It should be more reactive than proactive. And all the spikes we're seeing in shootings and crimes, violent crimes, that's all part of it.
So you get to take over the police department tomorrow, let's say. Obviously, as you're running for mayor, you'd have to wait a little while longer than that if you're successful here. But let's say you're in charge tomorrow. What do you do? What happens? You're mayor of New York City. You're therefore in charge of the police department. What changes in policies do you promote? What can you do immediately? What would you change on policing? Sort of day one.
Well, with policing and law enforcement, it's really not about reinventing the wheel. It's about going with policies and approaches that have worked in the past. As I said, Mayor Giuliani, Commissioner Bratton didn't invent the broken windows theory, but they were smart enough to know that it would work in a city like New York. I would return to those policies. Again, I would do it in a fairer way where they're not numbers driven. As example, stop and question, which was a lightning rod for controversy. The reason it became a lightning rod for controversy is because it became numbers driven. Stop and question is an effective tool for law enforcement if used fairly. And under my administration, you would see unproductive stops and unnecessary stops plummet, while productive stops, stops where you take guns off the street, where you take violent criminals off the street, that would rise. And that's really what we need to happen now. There's too many guns out there, too many people getting shot, too many lives being lost. So we have to become aggressive again. Again, more proactive, aggressive policing units, anti-crime. I would bring back those plainclothes units, and I would restore the morale of the NYPD. Right now, the morale is dangerously low, probably lower than it's ever been. And there's been a lot of valleys in policing, but they need to be supported.
What do you hear, if anything, from protesters? Again, separating, peaceful protesters from anybody who is committing the looting that we saw on those few nights. But what do you hear from protesters, Black Lives Matter movement, that resonates with you, if anything? Are there things that you would do, again, in this scenario where you're in charge of the police department tomorrow, or any point? Are there things that you would do to try to make sure there isn't racially biased policing, for example?
Absolutely. And again, that comes down to communication. I'm a strong believer in sitting down with legitimate community leaders, not people who are trying to throw gasoline on the fire, people who really want to help those communities. As mayor, I would sit down, I would lock myself in a room with those community leaders, with my top agency officials. We would hear their complaints, we would talk about their complaints, and we would try to fix it. And we would not leave that room until it was fixed. But again, it has to be people who are legitimately looking for answers, not publicity, but looking for solutions. And again, communication is so key.
You have 35 to 36,000 uniformed NYPD officers at this point. Do you think that's the right number? Do you think that, given some of the calls to remove some responsibilities from the NYPD, that you hear many conservatives, Republicans, many members of the NYPD sometimes say, we don't want to be responding to every mental health crisis call, for example, things of that nature. But do you think there are pieces of that puzzle that do need to be moved away from the NYPD? Do you think the head count should be changed in one way or another? What are some more of the sort of details of how you'd approach the police department in those two ways?
I would definitely increase the number of police officers that we have right now. I believe the number is too low. It's the lowest it's been in years. And does it correlate directly to the rise in crime? Probably. We're not seeing as many officers on the street. As far as mental health, that's an issue that we really have to get into and take seriously. The mayor and the first lady, the Thrive New York City, it was ineffective. And we can go into how much it cost and whether or not the money was ever accounted for. The bottom line is it had zero results. I would not take police officers out of the mental health business, so to speak, because when police officers respond to calls that may or may not involve someone who's mentally ill, they don't always have all the information right away. They may go to a job that's, described as a domestic disturbance. They have no idea walking in that it's a mental health issue. So how would you know when to bring a mental health official with you? You wouldn't. Most jobs that you don't get all the information right away. You have to figure out when you get there, and who's better equipped to do it than a police officer. Once you get to that juncture and you identify a mental health issue, then yes, I would have a team that is able to respond to those locations to act as support and to supplement the police. But when there's threats of violence, the police have to be there.
I think one of the questions people have in those situations, and you raise obviously a very complicated element of it, which is what do you know when the calls come in? Because that's often, as you say, incomplete information. But one of the things that people point to is the question of whether those responding officers are able to de-escalate a situation or if they wind up escalating it, right?
Right.
The mayor, current mayor in sort of fits and starts has talked about de-escalation training. I don't know that we've seen really any results from that, or whether that's really been fully implemented to the way that he said it would be. But do you have thoughts on what's needed to make sure that those incidents where someone isn't really necessarily posing a threat or isn't violent, to make sure that those incidents don't escalate? And I know your background in training might speak to this.
Yes. Yes, as a police academy instructor, we constantly ran through scenarios and trained officers in de-escalation tactics, in how to identify a possible mental health issue or crisis. The New York City Police Department undergoes more training in more different scenarios than probably any police department in the country. I know immediately the knee-jerk reaction is to scream more training, more training, more training. The NYPD does an incredible amount of training. You can't train for every possible scenario because every possible scenario is different. So what the NYPD is doing right now, I think, is they're doing the right thing. I think the training is adequate. There's always going to be situations that go off the rails a bit, and it's going to be something new for everyone to encounter. And you just hope that doesn't happen, and you hope it has a productive end where the person that needs help gets that kind of help.
I think when some people hear, and we're going to move on from policing in a second to lots of other issues, but I think when some people hear about sort of reinvigorating broken windows policing, increasing the uniform headcount of the police force, they worry that again, communities of color will be over policed, that things that are sort of look the other way in white communities, including things like drug sales, drug use, then become over criminalized in communities of color. How would you avoid that?
Well, it's very simple. I think we look at the numbers and you look at the facts. The majority of the gun violence, the majority of the homicides are taking place in minority neighborhoods where the police have been pulled back because of the ridiculous defund the police movement. Those are the neighborhoods that need more policing. They need police officers there because they save lives. That was the case in the 90s. When we went to the broken windows theory, we saved lives by being there, by being visible, by protecting the good people of the city, of every community. So does it have to be done fairly? Without question. And I explained before how I would do that. There will be no over policing. It'll be the right amount of policing. It will save lives. It will drive crime down. And as I said before, with public safety becomes so many other boons to the city economically and throughout other avenues.
And Mayor de Blasio has talked about, when he's talked about the increase in violent crime that we've seen this year, he said, he points to, social dislocation brought on by the pandemic, massive job loss. Do you think there's any validity to that as part of the root of what's led to increases in gun violence this year?
No, I don't believe that. I don't agree with that. The people that are committing crimes, the people that are shooting 1-year-olds in strollers, teenagers being shot in front of their homes, they're not being shot by people who just lost their jobs. Men and women of the city who unfortunately have lost their jobs, have lost hours, have lost income, are not running out, buying illegal guns off the street and shooting people randomly. That's being committed by hardened criminals that have been emboldened by the fact that the police have taken a step back. It's not the people who are struggling due to the pandemic, it's criminals.
So the next mayor of New York City, a lot will transpire in the 2021 year as this race is unfolding. But the next mayor of New York City will undoubtedly need to help revitalize the city's economy. And as you mentioned, public safety, it can be one piece of that. But let's broaden the discussion now. It was good to talk a lot about that based on your background. But what else would you want to do as mayor besides focusing on public safety? What are some other key sort of pillars, ideas of your campaign for mayor here that you would look to institute?
First thing we have to do is we have to open up the city. We cannot leave the city closed like this. It's strangling us economically and it's leading us towards disaster. We can open up the city. We can do it safely. We can respect this virus, but we can't have it destroy us. I would open up business. I would follow the science. If we can open up at a 50% rate and implement HVAC filtration guidelines, ventilation guidelines, again, stay with masks, social distancing, washing of the hands. If all these things work, which we're being told that they do, then there's no reason why we can't keep businesses open. We have to send a very loud and large message that New York City is open for business, because right now, if you own a business You don't want to be in New York City much longer because you're going to lose it. And if you're looking to open a business, why in the world would you come here? So we have to open up our arms, open up our businesses, open up Broadway, open up restaurants, bring back tourism, and get that economic boom that we had in the 90s. But we have to send a signal that we're open. We can't stay closed.
You think things like Broadway and indoor dining can be open safely before a vaccine is widely available and implemented?
I do. I think we can do it safely and smartly. Obviously, we can't go full capacity. We have to be smart. We have to follow the numbers. We have to follow science. But there is no science saying that we can't operate at 50%. There's nothing that says that. There's no science, there's no data saying that this virus is coming from or being spread in restaurants or indoor dining. We're not seeing that. If that's the case, we're definitely not seeing it. So
Well, I think
right now, as we speak, I do believe we can do it.
I think one issue is we haven't been getting great data from our
Yes.
elected officials to really have a great sense of where some of the spread is happening. It does seem like some of the causes of spread are, people who are tired of some of the guidelines, or just, struggle with the idea of wearing masks around members of their family, or not having friends and family over to small gatherings. Is there a way as mayor you would try to achieve more public buy-in to some of those guidelines until we're more in the clear because of a vaccine, which hopefully is going to achieve that, but we don't know for sure?
Well, I think, like you said, we really have to put the data out there
Hmm.
and show it. If that's the case, if it is coming from family gatherings, then we need to show that. We need to show the numbers to the people. And we have to hope that they have faith and trust in my administration and in our government to believe it. There's no trust, there's no faith in Mayor de Blasio's administration. There's none in the governor in Albany. So we have to rebuild that. We have to rebuild that trust, get the data, and be open and transparent about the data.
All right. So what else? So we're trying to reopen the economy. We're taking your adjustments to the police department. What else do you want to focus on as mayor? Are there things related to some of the other key issues that are always challenges in the city, whether it's the education system, the school system, affordable housing or housing development, other things that you want voters to know about what you would try to do as mayor?
Absolutely. The two other big issues right now in the city are certainly education and homelessness. You look at education and the way COVID has affected it. We don't have a plan. Nothing has worked so far. It's been too in and out, too back and forth, not enough preparation, and not enough execution. Our children belong in the school. Again, unless we're shown data that shows that schools are a hotspot and a super spreader, so to speak, until we see that, our children should be in schools. Our children have to be in the classroom. They have to have a strong leader in front of them, guiding them through difficult times. We have to go back to a fair and legitimate grading system. We can't go forward with what we have right now, where just everyone passes. That's not going to work. That's not going to help these children. It's not going to help their future. So we go back to a fair grading system. We go back to specialized testing for specialized high schools. We bring back solid education with goals. Special needs is a very, very big part of my administration and what I want to do. No one is suffering more right now than our special needs children. Special needs students need continuity, they need routine, they need support. They're not getting that. They can't get that through remote learning. I know that because I have a special needs daughter who's struggling mightily. So special needs hasn't always been given a fair shake by this administration. They don't have the resources or the tools. So again, that'll be one of my priorities. We need more resources for our special needs children. We need to get them in the classroom with teachers. Homelessness, obviously, that's something we're seeing every day on our streets. It's something you can't avoid. You can't put thousands of homeless people in a hotel, close the doors behind you, and make believe that the problem's gone. It doesn't work that way. My plan is more affordable housing, but supportive housing. We're not just going to put homeless people in, like I said, four walls and a roof and pretend everything's fine. We want to support them. We want to give them caseworkers that can help them assimilate back into society. Give them goals. You can get a job, you can work, you can be a productive member of society again. Get them feeling good about themselves. Because right now, they're just being shoved into hotels and the city's walking away from it. We can't walk away from our homeless. We have to help them.
That sort of ties into a larger question about housing and development in the city. What's your general philosophy on that? There's people of both parties who swing in sort of both directions, who say, we don't need to overdevelop our communities on one hand, and we don't want to upzone, more sort of residential communities with smaller houses or neighborhoods that don't have larger buildings. And then there's people who say, we need a lot more housing in the city, assuming an economic recovery in the next couple of years coming out of this crisis. And we just need a lot more housing that includes affordable housing. Where do you come down on that discussion?
I believe we need more construction and we need more housing. If you look back at the financial crisis that we went through in the 70s, again, I know that firsthand because my father was a police officer in 1973 and got laid off in the financial crisis in 1975. So I lived through that first crisis. New York City got itself in financial trouble because they were borrowing. They were borrowing way too much, way too often, and they put themselves in a tremendous hole. New York City got out of that hole through construction and through growth. And that's the way we have to approach this as well. We have to build, we have to move forward on a lot of construction projects. It creates jobs, it brings people back to the city, and that is the only way to bail us out. We cannot borrow anymore, we have to build. So I'm a big proponent of construction and growth in the city.
All right, so we just have a few more minutes here. I want to ask you more politically. We don't, necessarily fully know what the Republican field looks like here, but how do you sort of see coming out of this primary as the victor? What do you sort of see who are your voters and what's your path out of the primary? And then assuming you win that primary, you have to broaden your appeal to a much bigger base of New Yorkers. Republicans are outnumbered by such a vast majority by both Democrats and unaffiliated voters. So how do you do those two things?
Well, I think we have to reach the moderate Democrats. The progressives are going to be very, very difficult to get off their ideals, but the moderate Democrats that have been here in the city, who are really the majority of the city, they have to see what's going on and they can't be happy. And the more I speak to on a daily basis, that's the sense I'm getting, that they are fed up. We've had Democratic leadership in this city for going on 8 years. Are we in a better place than we were 8 years ago? Absolutely not. Crime is through the roof. Our economy is tanking. Education is completely collapsing. So those people, as you said, broadening my audience, so to speak, those people are fed up with what's going on. They don't like what they see and they don't like the future. And a lot of them don't like the candidates that are running on the Democratic side because it's more of the same. It's more Bill de Blasio's path to nowhere. So I think they're willing to cross party lines. I certainly hope they are. If they want to change, they're going to have to because we can't stay with the same policies.
Last two questions are quick. One, I think I get the sense of where this is going, but if you were giving a letter grade to Mayor de Blasio for his tenure, what would it be?
Well, I'll tell you what, before this year, I would have given him a D. Right now, he gets an F.
And do you have a political role model, someone in politics, past or present, that you look up to and try to emulate?
There's actually two. Ronald Reagan has always been my political idol. I've always liked the way, I was a young boy when he was president, but the way he spoke, the way, again, going back to communication, there was no one better. George W. Bush, in a sense, because when I was a 9/11 first responder, I was there when the buildings came down. And I remember when George W. Bush got on top of that pile and put his arm around the firemen, the words he said, I was standing not too far away. That lifted my spirits, that lifted New York's spirits, and that lifted this country's spirits. So I would definitely put Mr. Bush in that category.
All right, Bill Pepitone, thank you so much for the time today and be well.
Thank you so much. You too. Stay safe and stay healthy.
And thank you for watching Decision NYC with Ben Max. Key decisions for New York City voters are coming up in June and the fall. There's a lot on the line for all of us and the future of our city. I hope this conversation was helpful. I'm Ben Max. See you next time.